online, also make the room as conducive as possible. Second of all, just a reminder on POIs, please follow the guidelines, no badging, etc. I know that this will be a heated round, etc. Just make sure it's still encouraged, but maintain the to follow through the guidelines. Thirdly, if you guys have any gender preferred pronouns, you're free to mention, but it's safer to just refer to the speaker by their speaking role. So, for example, proposition one or opposition second speaker, etc. Lastly, on equity reminders, probably we're going to talk about certain things. Maybe you're going to bring cases or issues, etc. Just make sure that the issues that you are going to bring is represented in like a good manner, etc. Do not violate the equity guidelines. If you're unsure, if you really need to bring the sensitive stuff, of course, you're free to do so. If you feel like it is very important, just make sure that maybe you still follow the guidelines. And most importantly, maybe you also want to give trigger warning if necessary, if you feel like it is necessary. Yeah, so in the panel of judges, it will be me, each as the chair, and then the panels are going to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Kevin. Good luck for the debate.
Hi everyone, I'm Aldo. I'm going to be battling this round. Best of luck for both teams.
Great, thank you so much. And now, without further ado, under the motion is the first world in which moral value enhancement is compulsory for prisoners, inviting proposition 1 to start. Here.
Yeah, hi, am I audible? So then, pronoun she, her, trigger warning, I probably talk about pretty sensitive things, but that's only for debating purposes then. It is undeniably the government's fault that people end up jailed, people end up imprisoned without any criminal justice system to reprehensively save them in criminal status quo. I have 4 instances were set up then to make this a clear debate. Firstly, few characterizations then under my setup. Let's say that prisoners are indirectly jailed individuals, mostly because of extremely problematic behavior towards the law, for example. They make a morally incorrect decision, for example, that made them end up into this situation. But secondly, let's say that all of their backgrounds come from actively sometimes extremely difficult positions. This would mean that some criminal justice systems are inherently incorrect in certain situations. This is probably individual based. But thirdly, let's note that the whole premise of why individuals are jailed to begin with is because they attack the state value, for example. But why is it within the interest of the government to save them? It's undeniably because you are the most trusted authority for them. You must oblige to all the people, all the individuals who suffer under you. But secondly, what does the criminal justice system look like? Firstly, let's note that it is extremely volatile. In a certain sense, we have a few laws changing by decades, for example. But what is the purpose of it then? Firstly, rehabilitation. That would mean to actually help these individuals to garner whatever purpose they have under their lives. We will help them to inclusively change their moral behavior, for example. But secondly, it would look like retribution also, which would also mean to forgive and to link back and to give back to the government and to all of the people you've harmed, for example. But thirdly, it would mean isolation too, which is to imprison these individuals. Let's note that prison will still exist under proposition. The only thing that we're doing is enhancing this moral system. But fourthly, it would look like also confinement. So what is the burden of proof here? The burden of proof lies between whoever team can actually fulfill the system of parameter better, whoever can minimize whatever harm the criminal justice system has done in the current status quo. And we say proposition does that the best. Secondly then, for debating purposes, moral value enhancement would look like technology. Let's note that this is a fiat motion particularly, meaning that we have to assume this technology exists and it is inherently qualified by the government. It would probably be done by psychologists, for example, or licensed pharmacists and medical scientists and all of the professionals. So yeah, secondly, let's note that this machine is extremely qualified and credible. It probably would sometimes lead into mostly success cases and not failure. And in order for this debate to run, opposition would have to be charitable and agree to this factor because it is only absolute. First argument then, why this is principally justified? Let's note that the law should be certain but also emotional. That would mean you'd have to empathize with every individual under that factor. You'd have to oblige to every single one of them between their factors on whatever they did under the criminal rule. But let's note, why is this justified to limitize every individual's actors or emotions then under proposition? Firstly, let's note that the government has already done this in the current status quo. They limitize freedom, for example, by limitizing whatever criminal justice, whatever in criminal intentions you do. They, for example, limitize you to not steal or not kill, for example. We've already done that. But let's note that the government has an indirect autonomy to control this by their hands simply because it is a utilitarian principle. They're allowed and principally justified to do this because you're limitizing any reprehensive actions done by individuals in the current status quo. They're only limitizing all of the harms individual. This is why, for example, we have a state of exception. The government is allowed, for example, to put us in quarantine during COVID-19 or any certain pandemics because it is only allowed for you to do so. It is only between everyone's safety that you can control this manner. It's only principally justified for the government to do that. But secondly then, let's note on the birth lottery impact. Why do criminal things happen? Firstly, because of socioeconomic factors, they probably have to opt into bad things or bad criminal things to actually feed their family, for example. They'd probably have to do that. But actually, they would probably opt in like drug dealing, for example, or certain many gun violence or gun trading to have money to put food onto the table. This is what is done by individuals that exceptionally has to be obliged by the government itself. Because then again, you as a government have the autonomy and value to give these people coupons, for example, for food, to give them safety nets between the factor of society. But secondly, let's note that some people do not choose to be put in this situation. That would mean that this incentive would come from internal factors or internal situations. What does that look like? It would look like having mental issues, for example, or many mental psychological impacts that happen between that internal factor. Let's note that all of the alternatives happening in the current status quo are sometimes undeniable to this factor. They do not help any of these individuals to actually help themselves, and it comes from the moral incentive. Well, how do we fix this problem then? Firstly, let's look at by giving individuals a second chance. We give them a more effective case, for example, unlike what alternative has happened under opposition. What are the alternatives that happens under opposition then? It would probably look like psychological classes or whatever, like Bible reading or Bible studies or whatever. Why then this is not effective? Firstly, let's note that criminal justice system already have a pretty bad value under imprisonment. Imprisonment probably is certainly not effective in certain sense. Why? Firstly, you probably need to have a big network under the characterization to be a possible drug dealer, for example. You probably need to have a gang to actually succeed in certain criminal systems. You're probably going to end up worsen because not that, you're still going to be grouped into certain individual motive. Let's say human instinct probably would have to depend on one another, meaning they're affected in a certain sense. I'll take that POI.
How will birth lottery be effectively solved in your side when the only thing that you fix is the moral and not the actual living conditions of the person?
People don't choose to be mentally ill. People don't choose to be put in socioeconomic behavior. We say that this is only justified for us to do so. But why then imprisonment or whatever alternative that they have is extremely unjustified? Secondly, let's note that there's going to be a human instinct issues of the development itself. They depend on each other. You're worsening crimes under opposition when you group them, for example. For you to succeed between criminal crimes, you probably have to have dependence onto other people. That means you're indirectly influencing them to actually do this stuff. This is why some prisons, for example, have certain gangs, for example, or have certain behaviors between prisoners that still are impacted in the current status quo. These people still beat up each other, for example, in prison. There's no change gradually between that factor. But secondly, let's note that in the very worst case, people literally repeat all of their crimes and come back into prison. That means they probably do not see any retribution in this fact. That comes from the very internal factor, right, of you not understanding all of your mistakes. And how do we access this then? You can actually access this by having this emotional capacity to understand what you're morally wrong. That can only be done in moral bioenhancement. Because note that these individuals are most likely to be traumatic in a certain sense. They're most likely to have social issues or whatever reprehensive sense that puts them back into not committing into all of these actions, to not be reformative in a certain sense then. Secondly then, let's note that worsening crimes will probably happen under opposition. situation. But I just want to note this, since this is probably the biggest argument that they're going to bring about victims. Firstly, let's not how victims are always unsatisfied under this debate. They're probably going to still have the grudge, and we're not blaming them for doing so. But secondly, let's note that the criminal justice system should be is going to be fulfilled by the parameter when every individual under that factor gets the justice. For example, this is only justified for us to do this. But then again, let's note that we're not forcing any victims, for example, to forgive in this situation. But the very least is that every individual, for example, has a time for you to change, has a second chance and capability right now when you're doing this moral and bio enhancement. That would mean, comparatively, firstly, opposition would probably have an unfulfilled parameter of the criminal justice system. They would probably still repeat all of their mistakes again. They would probably still have no moral obligation in a certain value, because then now they still are struggling with all of the internal factors gradually happening within all of these individuals itself. That will still happen. Opposition would need to prove a better parameter and a better alternative happening within this debate. Only Team Calteam provides that to you. So proud to propose.
Opening notes, opening is from opposition and writing herself. Here.
Am I audible? Okay. Right. Take moral bio enhancements like fast food. Sure, you get energy, but no nutrients, right? Two models I'll be proving in this debate. A, why the function of criminal justice system would be fulfilled, and B, why their counterfactual is significantly worse. And if we prove the significance of these 2 points, we win. Moving on to my framing then. On side opposition, we strictly believe that their counterfactual world would be systematically worse because the inherent function of the criminal justice system and prisons would not exist. In which case, the burden here is to prove why these factors would disregard the existence of victims. This debate does not only revolve around convicts because victims will still exist on both sides of the house. 3 points of characterization challenging their own characterizations, right? They did not say what compulsory means. It means to mandate this for all prisoners, right? So not just convicts from crime of acquisition, like thieves, right? But also major convicts, including terrorists, etc., etc. And I would like to go to my second characterization on the implementation of moral bio enhancements, right? According to them, it also refers to the medical procedures routinely implemented, like how someone gets their flu shots, right? Okay. So, I would like to move on to the actor highlights on what the convicts actually look like on their side of the house. While yes, proposition may argue that it helps those from crimes of acquisition, remember that you do not have the epistemic access to someone's motives. These crimes are done because of government's players to facilitate them, right? But to put this into visualization, the idea of mens rea or guilty intent wouldn't exist because everything is just expected to change in their house. Therefore, I'll prove why the incentive to government to actually remove these failures of them will not exist on their side of the house. And when they try to disregard victims, I'd like to highlight them by saying that one of the CGS's goals is to cater to the victims. Therefore, retribution is compulsory on for those to feel safe and ensure that person would not exist in their plane of existence, right? Moving on to my arguments, but before that, any POIs?
POI?
Go ahead.
How are you trying to ensure the victims feel safe when at the moment the prisoner right now in status quo are taking revenge to them?
I'll be explaining that in my arguments then. Moving on to my first argument, why the function of criminal justice system wouldn't be fulfilled on their side of the house. This is going to be in direct clash with their argument regarding the utilitarian principle, right? 2 layers to this. First layer then is that the retribution's importance, right? Remember that retribution should prioritize the well-being of the victim and not just the convict. While sure, we bite the bullet that in the status quo, the prison system is not perfect. However, this does not disregard that in their side, the function of retribution only caters to the convict, and the victim would not, and even though they said that the victim would not be satisfied, it still does not disregard that sometimes these victims are so major that they do deserve these methods of retribution. They would not feel the idea that this is an eye for an eye. For some reason, they came back better than ever before. For some reason, they come back with rights as much as any other people else, and this characteristic would not ensure that they would feel safe. How is this person who abused me for so long, for some reason, has the right to this commodity where they, for some reason, suddenly become this different person, while me still suffering from them with no closure on how better off they should have been, right? Second layer then, because why the two other functions of deterrence and rehabilitation isn't even good on their side of the house. One of the main prerequisites to rehabilitation isn't the sudden result of, hey, I can change, but I am willing to change and I do not care how long it takes. So the inherent function of rehabilitation would be gone, since those who are really apathetic and should be set in this punishment that is prison can immediately change, right? The expectation on their side is they will immediately change or like go through a process where they're guaranteed to send. So therefore, there is no intent to rehabilitate nor the incentive to deter, because people would be better regardless whether they are intending to do that crime or because it is their method of survival. So therefore, I don't think they don't have a fiat to say that deterrence is exclusive on their side of the house. Second argument then, regarding why their counterfactual world is significantly worse than ours. First layer then, on the harms towards the prisoners. First of all, I've explained earlier because there is no more deterrence to not commit crime because they will be set free after using the drug, right? I'm bringing this in because I am expecting that when they are quote unquote more sympathetic, more understanding towards these victims, they are guaranteed to get out regardless of the caliber of their crime they did. And if they try to bring it on their second and third speaker, it will be too late, right? I'd say that the second aspect to this is that it glorifies the criminal justice system on the aspect that the reason why police brutality in the status quo exists, right? The CGS has a lot of harms because if you get falsely accused, you get sent to prison, right? Hence, with the implementation of moral bio implementation, this allows for the overreach of these police abuse towards the most vulnerable minorities, because these police officers can just expect as bad as they do it to these prisoners, they are just going to change into good people. They're going to change to this extremely new, changed and behaved person. This is why there would be zero incentive to why government wouldn't want to fix their own failures. The people that used to be angry at them, who are considered violent and selfish, are mellowed out. Even if they do still care about their community, they won't hold the government accountable for it, which should be an important metric in this debate. Second layer then is the fulfillment of retribution. Yeah. First of all, we've explained the harms towards the victim on how there is no form of retribution inserted in their metric, right? When to put this into visualization, trigger warning. When you say, let's say a sexual assault victim now in the know that your offender is suddenly defined as this changed man with more empathy, how much fear would that instill? They now don't have that sense of security because it wouldn't be achieved strictly because they're expected to instantly rehabilitate, right? Third layer then on the world comparative. When the government can't take accountability for their actions, that means the vicious loop where prisoners, alleged or not, are subjected to suddenly become these angels, while the inherent problem of governments are never solved, right? This is important because when the government does not fix its own failures, minorities are blamed for the government's failures, be it that minorities are seen as troublemakers or who need to be sedated or fixed in this set. There is an analysis on this, because this is now used as an excuse in their status quo to deny that these minorities retain privileges because they are seen as inherently bad. In which case, this has directly clashed with their POI regarding how this problem will never, the prerequisite to these problems will never exactly be solved, exactly because they instantly expect by utilizing these people, it will ensure change. In which case, so proud to oppose.
Okay, am I audible? Okay. Miss Devi always warned me to not eating ice cream before the competition, but I still eating way, and I always depending on the externality. It shows how the externality factors trying to controlling me and trying to govern me, it's not enough, because those kind of reason is always happen if there is no internal development. Opposition already lost its first because they never accommodate those kind of marginal benefit. If you talk about the terrorists and those kind of things, I willingly to engage to you in their cases. Two framings to my speech. Number one, notice how prison is still exists, those kind of alternative and rehabilitation still exists. The delta this debate is talking about why we should do and apply this kind of moral bio enhancement, which is all the cases that opposition trying to talk about. Oh yeah, victim insurance, for example, and etc. still exists on the our side because you still have those kind of deterrent effect. You still cannot go to your home, for example, and stay on the prison and like sleep on the prison, for example. I think this is a horrible thing that everyone don't want to happen, right? But second thing is, I think if you talk about those kind of minority issues, for example, we say we never shut down those kind of social movement that exists. I think you can still using those kind of soft approach, for example, in the status quo. They never explain to you first why those kind of violence is important. But even more, even if it's true, you're using and defending those kind of violence. Look at the people that being killed, for example, by those kind of like racial power, for example, or those kind of like the social movement, for example, using those kind of radical way. They're cutting the tree and trying to cut those kind of mobilization and those kind of chaotic thing, for example. Do you want to defend to that? I'm not really don't get those things, for example. You backlashing with those kind of principle. Let's talk about the clashes here. Two things in here. Number one, let's talk about the principle, because this debate is talk about the principle and how those kind of bio enhancement is good. But second, let's talk about the practical. Yes.
How would prisons exist when moral bio enhancement in your side ensures people are kind and fixed? Then just let them out, because prisons need to like literally put people who are bad in captivity, right?
Yeah, it's for the victim, right? Because you want to defend the victim still want to like let you, for example, to do those kind of things. But second thing is, under our side, if you increasing and enhance those kind of empathy, for example, it's making you more realized inside of the prison, for example. Why go and have to go to the prison, for example, and have those kind of realization, for example, better, and the time those kind of transition, for example, better for the security. I'll take the PI. But first classes then, let's talk about the principle level. What the proposition trying to tell? Three things in here. Number one, let's talk about the redistribution. Second, talk about like, yeah, we want those kind of person, for example, willingly change not by the intervention. But thirdly, let's talk about the government never like evaluate those kind of failure that exists. Number one, let's talk about the redistribution. This is a unique thing that what opposition trying to champion. There's two reasons why this is wrong. Number one, the redistribution never happened under their side. This is bad because in status quo, those kind of things, for example, is never proportionate. If you want to play on the very worst case that government is evil, I think exactly under your side, they still can be shut down, for example, toward those kind of the jail, for example. They cannot do whatever they want, for example, in the status quo. But second thing is, even if you want to get to those kind of redistribution, it's better on proposition, because we are the one that's likely to clearly and certainly explain and change those kind of individual and internality, for example, of the context of the human, for example, to making them realize and incentivize individual, for example, to have a better characterization. You be a more fair people, for example, and more those kind of things. What is the output in here? Simple. Number one, they will likely maybe volunteering, for example, do those kind of like the redistribution action, for example, and affirmative action, go to this kind of like victim, for example, and say sorry or whatever. They do anything, for example, in the status quo. But even if it's true that this will not happen and this is too ideal, I think at least under our side, there is no continuity, for example, outside of the prison, for example, because this has happened under our side. Remember, those kind of like bandar narkoba, for example, or the drugs people, for example, that using drugs, maybe even if they go to the jail, but after that, they're still using those kind of drugs, for example. It shows to you how the benefit of opposition is just a temporary moment, for example, the moment that you go to the jail, for example, because there is no intervention, trying to connecting your decision-making process, for example, and controlling self on yourself, for example. But second thing is, let's talk about like the unique ideas about like, oh yeah, we want you to willingly change, for example, and those kind of sincerity. Two responses for this. Number one, I don't find a clear reason why those kind of things is important, because it's not certain. We take it a trade-off. Even if it's true, under our side you are not sincere and you are being forced by government, this is still okay, because those kind of things is based on like how the externality goes, for example, and how externality always forcing to you, for example. But second, even if it's true, you want to talk about those kind of sincerity, I don't find a reason what is the parameter to someone to see that you are want to willingly to help people, for example, or not, right? But under our side, we take it a trade-off. Even if it's not sincere, even if it's not willingly, for example, we change them, for example, to making those kind of output are better, for example, and a better, like a tangible benefit, for example, for someone. At least we are not killing someone. At least we are not like shoot those kind of people, for example, in the status quo. But lastly then, let's talk about like the unique idea about government never likely to those kind of evaluate those kind of things, for example, and those kind of failure. Three responses for this. Number one, no, check and balances always exist in status quo. I think there's still a lot of people that still criticism you, for example, trying to criticizing you in the social media media, for example, using those kind of soft approach, for example. But even more, I think there's in the big interest of the government to always evaluate themselves because they want to go to the election. They want the people to vote you, for example. That's why they have those kind of interest, for example, to making those kind of good. But second, even if it's true, I don't find a reason why under their side, suddenly when the minority trying to do those kind of things, for example, and go to the jail, and then suddenly minority racism will gone anyway, I don't find a reason because there's no likelihood and output under their side to change those kind of structural thing, for example, that exists in status quo. What is the weighing in here? Number one, our principle is certain, and this is aligned with the interest of the law because those kind of CGS and law should need those kind of certainty and a priori regulation, for example, trying to defending them. That's why in status quo, like there is a hard time moment, for example, for you to trying to like changing your like rule, for example, and regulation and those kind of law, for example. It shows how certainty is important. Why those kind of certainty is important? Simple, because those kind of things are ensure those kind of compatibility of the people paying tax to you, people paying those kind of things, for example, and contributing to your country, for example. It should ensure to you, for example, trying to maintain those kind of compatibility inside of the country, for example. That's why in principle we win. But second thing is on the level of the likelihood, their benefit and assume in the very best case is just a marginal benefit and just saving those kind of terrorists. But on the our side, we can save a lot of more better, for example, in the marginal benefit, in the more like macro benefit, for example. We save those kind of people in the average level, for example. We are not just like playing on the very worst case in the status quo. What is the extension in here? Number one, I just want to portray to you what is the contextualization of human, because this is basically like what is near with us, for example, and this is important for the CGS context. Three things in here. Number one, I think I just want to bring Justin Bibisona matter. I think in this before the civilization, for example, with the moment the state nature is exists, human is inherently, Thomas Pope trying to characterize them is a brute, solitary, and those kind of things. It shows to you that's why law and externality come and establish trying to controlling those kind of habituation. That's why we have law to not killing someone and etc. Why this is not enough? Simple, because the internality and emotional connectivity that we have inside of our body and inside of our human, for example, is uncontrollable. That's why we maybe sometimes we angry and kill people, for example, or maybe we angry and punch someone, for example. Maybe I punch you because I'm angry and stressful, for example. It is debating, for example. It shows to you how those kind of things is important to making those kind of internalization for being a self-defense mechanism and filterization, for example, to controlling your inside of your body and those kind of things, for example. Why is it important? Number one, it's about the certainty, because law trying to preventing someone to do and likely to making those kind of tangible impact towards someone, right? You don't want someone die because you're like your habituation, for example. We controlling the better on the principle level. On CGS we win. Secondly, then let's talk about the practical things. The only thing that they contribute is about like, oh yeah, victim will be safe, for example, and security. Three responses for this. Number one, I question the likelihood why they will likely to be feel secure, for example, because under their side the logic list happen like the prisoner still go to the prison after they go out from the prison, they still want to kill people, they still want to like do a revenge because someone is reporting them. So I don't find a reason why security is happen. But second, at least on the our side as a trade-off again, I think the prerequisite for them to get those kind of security and making all those kind of alternative and status quo are working, for example, and get those kind of deterrent effect is happening proposition actually, because using this kind of technology is making you more realized, for example, and the processing for you to change your habituation, for example, and your continuity of it, for example. Why does this matter? Number one, I think the reason why someone doing a crime, for example, is a cross generation, for example, and intergenerational. For example, maybe I do it because my father do it to it, for example, and etc. But at least on the our side, how society approach to it. Number one, society will reacting it with a good way, because right now they are thinking that they are not scary like what I talk about, for example. They do something good to me, for example, and etc. We stopping those kind of generation, for example, to always happen in the continuity. Under their side, it's just a temporary, because at the end of the day, people can be uncontrollable again, for example. That's why incredibly proud to win.
Okay, it's not working. Starting. Oh, sure, thank you.
I don't think that works.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Proposition lives in a world where they give criminals, murderers, and kidnappers an easy way out and allow them to turn into angels, while on the other hand, victims don't get any closure at all. Two pieces of framing at the top of my speech. Firstly, let's question Proposition's mechanism, right? They told you that they will do retribution, rehabilitation, and isolation. I'm going to address this one by one. Firstly, on retribution, I don't think it is exclusive, right? And so we still have the benefit of of the prisoners giving back to the community and them actually being retributed. I'm going to explain this later. But then secondly, on rehabilitation, I don't think it exists in your side of the house because literally the prisoners don't have incentive to better themselves exactly when they know that at the end of the day, they will still be injected by some moral bioenhancement, for example, and they will still magically be angelical without them having to try to be angelical. And so at the end of the day, they won't try to be kind, they won't try to be whatever out of their own willingness because there's an easy way out at the end of the day. But then thirdly, on isolation and imprisonating the prisoners. I tell you that this is actually impossible, right? Because if we look at the purpose of prisons, it's to actually keep the prisoners who are dangerous, who are harmful, to keep them captivated in prison. But once you give these prisoners a leeway with moral bioenhancement and they become kind and they become acceptable in society, then I don't think prison has a function anymore. And that is inherently why prison won't exist in your side of the house because it doesn't have a purpose, right? But then secondly, they try to dismiss murderers and terrorists by saying that this is a minor case. But notice that murderers and terrorists, even though they come from a minor case, they cause the biggest problem. Like 9/11, for example. Like the terrorists that we literally see in the news, for example, later. Like literally, just because they are from a minor case doesn't mean that suddenly you can dismiss them. Please engage please engage later. But then, their biggest case is that people won't commit crime anymore in their side of the house. But I don't think this is actually valid, right? Because in our side, even deterrence exists. Deterrence exists when there's a fear of another similar or worse punishment. When you, for example, experience such worse living conditions in prisons, for example, that is when you're deterred from doing the crime. But then, comparatively, in their side, it does not create deterrence the moment that the prisoners know that they will have moral bioenhancement after their mission, right? For example, after they murder someone or after they kidnap someone, they know that at the end of the day, they will be forgiven anyway with this moral bioenhancement. And so the likelihood is, I think they will go all out in their crime exactly because they know that they wouldn't get death penalty, for example, or they wouldn't get into prison because they can go all out in their crime, and at the end of the day, they will be forgiven with moral bioenhancement. Before my clashes, sure.
If you agree that terrorism already caused a lot of problem, for example, then why you agree to not making them be a good person and kind person to not killing someone?
Exactly, in status quo, terrorists and murderers are literally get death penalty or they get life in prison, right? And so we don't get why we should there's the urgency to make them kind people anyway. Because in our side, they're still protected in this law and they wouldn't get out anyway. But then moving on to my issues. Firstly, on justification on the actions towards the prisoners. What did they tell you? Their PM told you that there's birth lottery that force people to do certain crimes, right? I already told you in my response in my POI, right? How would government be incentivized to give these people financial help and etc. when in your side, birth lottery, it's not even going to be solved because the only thing that you solve is the moral and the mental of the prisoners, not their financial situation. But then we think that in our side, it is going to be better because in status quo, rehabilitation exists. The fact that government cannot just escape their responsibility and say that, oh, I've done my job, I've made this prisoner a good man. No, you need to rehabilitate them. You need to make them good again in society. You need to train their skills, train their jobs so that they can actually pursue their livelihoods, right? And so in our side, we think that this is a exclusive benefit. But then we think why rehabilitation exists in the very first place is fair in and of itself, because the fact that deterrence comes from their own self-evaluation and consciousness. Yes, some criminals can get out earlier than others, but this is a benefit because then people are motivated to sincerely become a better person to get out of prison. If they're not a better person, then you won't get out of prison in status quo, right? But then how do we ensure that this rehabilitation actually will be effective? I think there's probation in our side of the house. The fact that we still supervise this person for a certain amount of time, for example, and if they do commit the crimes again, they will go back to prison. This is the exact deterrence in our side. But then secondly, they told you that in prison, people would do violence against each other. Three responses to this. Firstly, no. Blue prisons and green prisons exist. Low crimes aren't purposely put in high crimes facilities, prison facilities, right? But then secondly, even in high crimes facilities, I think outside of prison, these people would still do violence against each other anyway. So I don't get the urgency. But then thirdly, I think exactly this is good when people know that in prison people do violence against each other, and the livelihood in prison is not that good. People would be deterred from doing crimes because they don't want to go to prison. This is the exclusive benefit in our side. But then I'm going to prove to you why the government is going to be taken more accountable in our side. Because we think that mental health is going to be better in our side the moment that the government cannot just say that, oh, we have already done our job and we've already given moral bioenhancement to these prisoners. The fact that we still take these government accountable, the fact that exactly the prerequisite for I think that there's no incentive in their side of the house for government to be taken accountable, because the government can just say that, oh, whatever we're doing to minorities and whatever we're doing to prisoners is good. We're fixing them and making them kinder and etc. I think it is very naive, right? But then secondly, to my second issue on the impact to victims, what did they tell you? They told you that they question how victims will feel safe when in opposition, criminals will take revenge. Two responses to this. Firstly, I think victims feel safe exactly when criminals are imprisoned in our side of the house, right? But then secondly, even if in your side, these criminals are suddenly kind, I think people would still get the trauma, people would still get scared when they see the literal person who, for example, raped their daughter, who murdered their daughter. They would still get trauma by seeing their face, right? No matter if the mental of that person is already good or not. But then thirdly, I think the feeling of revenge and emotional trauma that exists in your side of the house that the victims have to deal with is worse, because victims on their side, people would say to victims that, oh, you should move on because the criminals are nice now and you don't have a purpose to do revenge on them again because criminals are already fixed. I think in your side, victims will be invalidated because they have less closure. They know that the reason the prisoners change is not because of their own effort, not because of what they actually did, but because the government forced them to do so, right? So then, moving on to my extension on how proposition actually also harms the most vulnerable actors they're trying to protect, i.e. the prisoners. I think the retribution in our side exclusively exists when victims or society discover that the defendant has been adequately punished for a crime, right? They achieve a certain satisfaction that our criminal procedure is working effectively, which enhances faith in law enforcement and our government. What happens in their side when the government literally just tell the criminals, when the government literally just tell the victims to shut up because, oh, we already fixed the criminals? I think victims will still want retribution, right? You don't live in a vacuum. The fact that these victims, for example, the mothers of these daughters, they still feel immense mental pressure and immense sadness because they just lost their daughter. I think what happens in your side is that people will take law into their own hands and they will do vigilantism, because we think that in a case where an action seems as immoral as illegal action, I think in their side they will people would opt into illegal action, aka vigilantism, because it's better than letting these criminals go without any retribution in your side of the house. But then I think retribution is different from revenge, right? Because in retribution, at least with law, you're going to hit back with equal force, with equal proportionality. Whereas we think that revenge often involves hitting back harder than we have been struck. I think in your side, check and balance will be worse. So for all those reasons, I think that on vulnerability, we are protecting the most vulnerable actors, i.e. the victims, but we're also protecting the prisoners that they're trying to champion. So proud to oppose.
Okay, is this volume is okay? Pronoun preferences will be she or her. Yeah, since we're talking about something quite sensitive, I'll try to be as sensitive as I could, but I apologize beforehand if there's something that might offend someone just for the purpose of the debate. Oppositions of the House already mistook what our PM already stated on what is the bio enhancement under our side will happen. I believe it is a kind of rehabilitations and healings, but it's not as a mere rehabilitation that exists in the status quo. But you use technology to change their mindset, to change them morally. It means that it will be more significant rather than the rehabilitations, because what we change now, we forcefully use technology to change themselves internally. And I believe there is a different characterizations of biomechanism that brought by them. But do notice that first, it is an imagination motion. So you need to concede that in our world that this will be very effective and it will be done. Because if you're not concede into that, I believe this debate won't run and you're being not charitable at all. And I believe that here both sides agree that prisoner is bad and we want to fix them. But what we are emphasizing here is who can fix the prisoner and in the most effective and significant way, which I believe we champion that. Before anything, three things why the opposition of the House already felt this debate. I believe that their burden is so big, right? Because they said that under our side, it is unproven, that it is not significant, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to say that, you need to prove us why the alternative that you brought is significantly better than our side, because I believe it already stated by our PM and DPM on how external way wouldn't be effective at all, as would be expert under my clash. And I believe that. And then secondly, you are being very utopic, because how under your side, because they're going to prison, they suddenly want to change themselves because of the punishment of, because the government forced you to do so, you will just change yourself. The fact that even like, how could government change you, that the fact that your mom tell you, you will then just obey them. I believe that being too utopic. And lastly, they are not charitable, because they said that under our side we will just release them, because I believe our PM and DPM already stated on how under our side they will still be isolated, because that's just how the CJS works. Later, because they will still get isolated, they need to be isolated from other people. So even if yes, under our side they will just get released, I believe it is just okay. The fact that the technology already changed their moral, it means that their moral will be still better and good even if they're released. Framings, 4 things. First, I believe that how can a person accused to do crime is 2 things. First, they has really done it, and then second, they has the intention. Not later, I said. It means that both of things happens by the personal will. This is why we said that the internal change is very effective. And then second, what we stand here is the internal changes. And if they want to counter that, they need to prove why external changes will be effective. And then what is the delta here is who can make a prisoner a better person significantly. And then lastly, I believe that we went into the second change things, because I believe that under our side, we give them a second chance, which is a greater good for them, which will be explained under my clash. POI.
We already agree that bioenhancement is so effective, the fact that it will make prisoners kind, etc. Exactly, you're going to invalidate victims and not take the government accountable.
I believe victim already stated by our DPM. I believe here the victim is not only asking you, I believe under your side, the fact that victim wouldn't be satisfied at all because the law wouldn't just fulfill a victim. It proves that under your side, it wouldn't be that significant either. But under our side, we will fix it, explain under my clash. And then, okay, you said that how it is unjustified because epistemic access will then happen under our side. I believe epistemic access is what we are emphasizing here, panels, because under your side it is just not visible, because epistemic access is where you need to feel it, right? But it wouldn't happen under your side, because first, the fact that you punish them because you still punish them, right? It means that you punish them without knowing their epistemic access. You wouldn't judge or jury wouldn't ask what is your epistemic access to just lower down your punishment, right? And then second, you couldn't just cater into all epistemic access, the fact that a lot of prisoners happens and blah blah blah. I believe that it's not proven under your side, and which under our side we believe that epistemic access is not important. You already done it. You have the intentions. You have done it. You already do the crime. It means that under our side, what is wrong is your moral, and we need to fix that. First clash, who can provide a better mechanism of justice systems? I believe that first, to the victim. Why under our side we could prove this? The fact that I already explained under POI that the victim would always ask for more. They wouldn't just have a good payback. They want the perpetrator to be punished, to punish more, right? It means that under your side, the law wouldn't just be axed significantly, because because looking the fact that now maybe the victims will just ask for more. It proves that how under our side it will provide you the fact that under our side they are now morally changed. Maybe in the future they will apologize, which what the victim wants, because they want the regret from later from the perpetrator itself. And how it could significantly beneficial the government. Right now, after the moral change by the bio enhancement, they have a moral change. It means that they become a better person. It proves how under our side the criminal will like less likely to be happen, because now the deterrent effect is more significant. Why deterrent effect is more significant under our side? I believe that under your side the deterrent effect is too utopic, because how the prison etc. is not effective. Do notice on how prisons already exist from thousands years ago, but now the criminals exist. The fact that I already explained that how the drug dealers go into prison, but they still sell drugs anyway. It proves that how prisons will then be effective. I believe that it means that you cannot explain on how external effect would give you a deterrent effect. Meanwhile, under our side, the deterrent effect would what is very exclusive is the preventive effect, because we prevent a further more harms that happen, that they would do the crime repeatedly. It is what they couldn't prove, and I believe the deterrent effect is already explained. And then why would this fulfill the CJS incentive at the first place? Because what the CJS want is how the people would be better, because at the first place they already harm the value of the state. So how the people will be better? We already stated it a lot of times, because the change that's significant is how you get it from internal, your personal will. So if a prisoner doesn't have the personal will, as they said, then we need to forcefully change them through the technology that we said. This is why we do concede that maybe it's not unconsented, but for the sake of the state, for the sake of the victim, for the sake of the whole society, we need to forcefully change them into a better person through the technology, because I believe that prisoners wouldn't just easily change themselves for a lot of things. And who can provide a better life for prisoners? Two things. First, short terms and long terms. And in the short terms, first, I believe that they wouldn't just easily change, right? It proves how under our side they would change into a better person in a short term. It means that in the prison itself they would see each other as a better person. How long term? I believe that we give them a second chance. How? Now the society perceive us prisoners not in a bad label that they had done this, they had done that. Notice on how prisoners never got a second chance or never got a job opportunity because they are labeled as a prisoners. But under our side, the fact that the society will see them as something good because they believe on the bio enhancements, it believes on how under our side we could provide a better life for the prisoners outside them. Because right now, they believe that the prisoners that going outside of the bio things, it is a better person because they have now morally changed. So it means that under our side, we could prove a better welfare for them after they go out of the prisons. And why under our side, it is a humane way for them. Because now they are not conceived as someone is bad anymore through the society. Yes, it is unconsented, but it is. I believe it's a better trade-off. Because even if you're unconsented, because if you want to stay in the things that you will stay to be bad. I believe the social punishment is just worse rather than the biomedical things that happen under our side. That's why I give the win to Caltem.
I think that one thing that proposition failed to characterize about victims is that good actions aren't seen as good as long as the fact that you still have trauma, that you still feel like these people are inherently bad, no matter if they apologize. To just ruin proposition's case, let me ask you a question, judges. Would you accept an apology from your father's murderer? For that reason, so proud to oppose. But firstly, 2 points of framing. They try to tell us that our burden is to give them counterfactual, right? To give them like a counter world. No, I think that our burden here is to just simply defend the status quo because this house prefers motion. Their burden is higher because they need to logically give us a logical explanation of how this world would run, right? They need to tell us that we don't have a fiat to like question why prisons would exist, but I think we do, because as long as they don't give us a logical explanation on why prisons would exist, when we already know in the current status quo that prisons are very expensive, that's why they have to be controlled by like private institutions, because they're very expensive for the government to maintain. Why the government would still choose to spend millions of dollars on prison when there's this bio enhancement drug? We really don't see the analysis coming from proposition even until the last. If they want to bring it and replies, it's too late. Don't credit on that. Sure.
I think the purpose of the deterrent effect to making people nice, if we can make it better and assume in the very worst case we don't have reason, is okay anyway.
Okay, I'll address that later. But second point of framing then, I think simply, like the burden again, like as long as we can prove to you that there are like there are like other forms of like rehabilitation, that in the current status quo that the world is like enough that we can be better, and that we don't have to like make a whole nother world, is enough for us to win this debate, right? So 2 points of clashes here. Firstly, I think most important one is which side actually prevents less crime. I think their biggest point is this, that people wouldn't repeat crimes because they wouldn't have any more internalities. I think we already like broke this down repeatedly, but I'm going to end this right now. Firstly, notice how this isn't exclusive in 3 points. Firstly, there is rehabilitation in the current status quo. We believe they already mentioned this. Like but like why is this better in our side of the house? Because notice that in our side of the house it is more fair, because when you are rehabilitated, you make the conscious choice to choose to be better, that you are, as a horrible person, are still accountable for your crimes, because you have to do like all the process in order for you to get rehabilitated later. You have to do all the process in order for you to be better, right? It's more fair because at least in our side of the house, these people who are willing to change themselves after their crimes are better. But secondly, notice how prisons exist, and prisons are a great form of preventing people to do crimes. Why is this so? Because prisons provide such an economical burden that when you are in prison, you cannot eat the food you want, you cannot go to the places you do, you cannot see your family again. This gives a very good incentive for criminals to not repeat their crimes, simply because they don't want to end up in prison again. We don't see engagement coming from them even until their last like substantive. But secondly, we already told you from DLO how there are like things such as probation, how there are like ankle monitors and whatsoever. We believe that the criminal justice system is not that incompetent. They will still keep track of these criminals. Don't buy their case about how the criminal justice system like is so incompetent that they can't prevent murderers from murdering again. Notice how there are already the current status quo, like even the register of like sex offenders. We believe that there's current check and balances later. But like, so how do you weigh these panels? I think you have to weigh this on impact. Their impact is very minimal, that their only benefit is only when the CGS truly fails and these criminals somehow like commit crimes like uncaptured. But what is our impact here, and why is our impact better on scale? Because our impact is simple. When there's bio enhancement, there is no more deterrence later. There's no more deterrence because when you know that when you commit crime, you immediately get injected and released back, there's no deterrence for you to not commit the crime. You can just commit the crime, get injected, and then sent back to freedom. There's no incentive for you to prevent yourself or to put a check and balances on your side. Why is this more important than whatever benefits they try to parrot later? Don't badger. But why is this more important than whatever benefits they try to parrot? Because simple. Because in our side, the crime is already done, the damage is already done, but the prisoners get off scot-free. Meanwhile, whatever benefits they have for crime deterrence only happens when either not exclusive, or B, like it's very worst case scenario, and they need to like and they never gave us a good weighing on why it trumps our benefits, which we already mentioned in the NLO about deterrence. But secondly, on second impact then, about the structural issues, let's play two actors in this. Firstly, the victims. They're there to tell you two things. That firstly, victims are scared of revenge and they fix this. I think we already rebutted this a lot when we already told you that there are currently check and balances on our side of the house. But secondly, we tell you that this is worse on their side of the house because exactly there's no deterrence for criminals to not commit crime, right? We already told you this then. So what actually happens is when you are more likely to become victims of multiple crimes because crime will just skyrocket on their side of the house. They never engage this until their last speaker. But secondly, they're trying to tell you that victims aren't going to feel satisfied either way. So just don't give them retribution at all. We really don't see the analysis on this because victims are the one who are like most harmed. They are the ones who have trauma. So at least there should be a delta, and why we can still win this when we tell you that there's going to be more retribution on our side of the house. But how is there going to be more retribution? But like, how is this retribution not going to exist on their side of the house? Simple, because even if the criminal does something good, it won't be seen as good if the mindset of the victim is still traumatic, right? This means that even good things, such as, for example, you like apologizing or you saying sorry for their crime, it won't be received well by the victim, simply because they still feel trauma, that this apology, that this "I'm so sorry" will never bring their father back, that this whatever. Yes,
with the good action that you have, it's gradually will change those kind of trauma. Even if it's not, it take a long time. We take it at least we save them.
Okay, but firstly, I don't think no analysis on that. They haven't given an analysis until except for that POI, which is just an assertion, right? But secondly, we feel like there's more likelihood for our counter narrative, for our counter happening to happen, because simply the victims would know that again, that the reason why these criminals change is not because they care, it's not because these criminals actually feel bad for what they done, but it's because the government inject them with a magical drug. We don't see how there will be satisfaction, how there will be closure when all that change is just because there's new substance injected into their blood, and not because they actually feel guilty for the crimes that they perpetrated. But how does retribution exist on our side of the house? Simple, because we already told you that retribution exists in and of itself in the current CGS. But secondly, notice how in our side of the house, when you give an apology to the criminals, when the criminals say sorry, it matters. It has more weight, because exactly that these victims had to go through the realization of the horror of the crimes they committed, that they had to feel the guilt, the shame, and the victims know that because there's no magical drug, that is when there is closure, that is when there's retribution. But last point then, on the structural impacts, they told you that government will still be accountable for socially, that there will be still social movements, and so minorities won't be jeopardized. But notice, panels, that the prerequisite for social movements to happen is that what's happening in minorities have to be constituted as harms, right? We don't think that social movements will even exist on their side of the house, because in their side there's no incentive, because what is happening to minorities, that they are going to prison, is not seen as a harm. It's seen as good. It's good that minorities are going to prison because they get injected with this drug that makes them better people. We don't see how people would see prison or CGS as still something bad, something that needs to be social, that's something that needs to be campaigned against, when it has benefits making you good, right? So we already told you the impact of this pretty clearly, that again, that the government will just brush away accountability and paint these minorities as the black sheep, that they are the troublemakers. For all those reasons, so proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for the opposition for the speech, and also have one review of the debate from side opposition, inviting oppositions from side. Here.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, wait. How do you set this? Okay, thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In Proposition's world, they give a second chance for murderers, rapists, terrorists who has caused irreversible harm toward families and communities. But notice that mothers who lost her daughter to a kidnapper would never get the second chance to meet her daughter again. 3 mistakes from Proposition. Firstly, this House prefers a world motion. They cannot just take for granted that existing prison systems would still exist in their side of the House, because you reset the world from zero, right? This means that our likelihood about how retribution is an exclusive, rehabilitation won't happen, and isolation won't happen is actually still stands in their side, because they never rebutted this. But then secondly, we already agree that bioenhancement is so effective. Exactly, this is the problem because of 2 reasons. Firstly, you're going to invalidate victims. The fact that people can just say to victims that, oh, the criminals are nice now, you should leave your grudge behind. You should not think about your the past anymore. But also secondly, you're not going to be able to take the government accountable, because they can just deflect any kind of protests from the public by just saying that, oh, we already solved the root cause, we already solved the root problem of the criminals, they're not going to do crimes anymore. But then thirdly, I think they say that in our side it's problematic because if the prisoner has no personal will, they cannot become a good person. At least in their side, they say that they ensure criminals will 100% become a good person. We literally don't care, right? We say that it's not justified for criminals to not do anything at all, to not put any effort at all into becoming a good person, and then suddenly you just give them the easy way out. This is literally why your side is not justified. But then, thirdly, they try to tell you in POI how slowly victims will overcome their trauma. We say that this is literally, firstly, this has no likelihood analysis. But also, secondly, I think it is not justified because victims inherently will always remember the trauma that literally uprooted their whole lives. For example, when you lost your daughter to a murderer, you're not going to just suddenly forget that you didn't have a daughter. You're going to always remember that a murderer took your daughter away. But then lastly, they try to tell you that in our side, law isn't that significant either because you cannot trust it. But then, they literally contradict this with their own claim. What did they tell you? They told you that victims will constantly ask for more and more in our side. Exactly. Check and balance exist. Not only victims, but also public can see the conviction, can see the process of law that exists in status quo. Public can say if this process is not legitimate, if the conviction is not good, or if the verdict is not good, then there will be check and balance, and exactly government will be incentivized to follow this check and balance because they want governmental legitimacy, if they want the public to still support them and to still follow their rules and programs, right? But then, moving on to my issues. I have two here. Firstly, on justification of retribution towards criminals, and secondly, on protection on victims. First issue then, they try to tell you that, oh, we should give a second chance to criminals, we should provide them jobs for prisoners and ex-criminals. First thing here, I think that when prisoners and criminals are, for example, they're forced to do a certain crime because of birth lottery, then they wouldn't get such a long amount of prison time anyway, right? And I think that when check and balance exists, exactly people would be able to take the government accountable and say that, hey, this person is not guilty, they're literally the victim of your own systematical inequalities, and so you should do a retrial or something. I think this is exclusive in our side. Comparatively, in your side, even if you want to say that oh, murderers and kidnappers need a second chance, I said that this is literally not justified, because imagine if you see your murderer or criminal in a local grocery store, I think you will be terrified and your trauma would be relived again. But that second issue then on protection of victims, they literally do not protect the victims at all, right? They try to tell you that, oh, in their side, criminals won't do revenge again, and etc. But we already told you how in our side, deterrence still exists, and exactly when they are in prison, they will not do the whatever again, and the victims will feel a sense of satisfaction because the criminals have been retributed. And for all of those reasons, so proud to oppose.
Okay. Opposition stop playing victim in this debate because they are trying to victimize us, but not care about the victim, but we care about it. Four strategical flaws that exist in opposition. Number one, their case can operate and benefit can operate insofar they can prove why those kind of rainbow cases and benefit cases it can run. We already throw the burden. How about those kind of CGS is bad, for example? But even if it's true that CGS is good in the status quo, we already flip this by saying that exactly we enhance it better, for example, on the our side, trying to make it more like those kind of processing and bureaucracy are better, for example. And I think they are very uncharitable to saying that we don't have any prison. Meanwhile, the motion say that the prisoner, for example. But second thing is, notice how they're backstabbing their cases, and this is contradiction to analysis. Number one, their PM, their LO, trying to concede that, oh yeah, we want you to willingly to happen, for example, and willingly likely to retribute those kind of things, for example, and feeling kind to other people. But somehow, their second and third saying that, there is a check and balances for law for you, for example, and forcing individual to be nice with other people insofar for you to go out from the jail. It shows to you how sincerity is not the important metrics to count this is good redistribution, for example, for the victim or not? This is something that I already question, but they never answer since the third. But lastly then, I think when they're trying to say that, feeling guilty and those kind of things, for example, in stack speaker, we already told you that exactly the processing moment and the moment and in prerequisite for you to feeling guilty, if you have those kind of empathy inside of your mind, if you have those kind of decision-making process better and those kind of things, we caught their benefit by saying that exactly those kind of processes are better and they're on those kind of prerequisite is happen in proposition. But thirdly, notice how they bring a late matter in the reply. The reply trying to say that there is a check and balances, for example, for the law because victim demand more and more and more. But even if it's true, it is not late matter. For example, I think our third already conceded by saying that it's making an asymmetrical, because if you are always unsatisfied by it, for example, you're always demanding those kind of people, for example, doing and go to the jail everywhere, for example, or maybe doing something the death penalty, for example, or doing something that is more harder, for example. Meanwhile, I already told you the characteristic of human not doing crime just because they want to, but because their own like human biologically thing, for example, inside of their brain or some sort of things like that. That's why it's very important and engaged by them. Two classes of my speech. Number one, let's talk about the principle level, victim and accepted that being glorified on their side. Secondly, about the practical. Firstly, about principle. This is talk about those cases. Just talk about the victim, those kind of things. For example, for important weighing why you can throw out this principle. Number one, notice how law is not just for a victim. This is something I emphasized in my debate, because the thing is, law is exists to controlling the habituation of human to trying to give a proportionate right, for example, for the one that do to, for example, and committing those kind of crime. It shows to you how this is not exclusively just protecting those kind of victim. But second, even if it's true, I think we are the one that protecting those kind of continuity and long-term effect, because exactly we preventing those kind of crime, for example, because I already told you the likelihood on how the cross-generational, for example, and those kind of problem that exist. But thirdly, even if it's true, we sacrifice them, for example, I think utilitarianism is the important principle of law. We always sacrifice those kind of people, for example, in the status quo right now, in the status quo. But fourthly, we flip it by saying that exactly those kind of redistribution towards like the victim are better, because right now we incentivize them by those kind of externality and by those kind of like this kind of biomedical, for example, trying to redistribute, for example, and trying to do those kind of action, kind of affirmative action, for example, and it's being engaged by themselves. Why we win on this principle? Number one, our principle is certain, because exactly without questioning those kind of things, it's certainly people will be a nice person. But under their side, no guarantee, no insurance, no likelihood why people will change, and they never answer this because they never prove this burden. Second classes, about the practical. Their main practical is just talk about deterrent effect. But the two responses for this. Number one, we already told you that prison exists under our side and give a deterrent effect. But even if it's true, I think we win on the weighing on the trade-off, because even if prison is not exist under our side and we release them, for example, we already concede and we already reach, for example, the purposes of deterrent effect. The reason why we give a deterrent effect to change and controlling those kind of behavior of the human, for example, and it's exclusive because it's more certain under our side. Under your side, there is no likelihood at all why those kind of deterrent effect is more certain, for example, and why you can get those kind of deterrent effect, for example, under their side. That's why Khatim should go to quarterfinal.
Congratulations for both teams finals and yes.
Gosh, you're so good.
You're so good. Oh, thank you, good David. You're so good. You're so good. Thank you. Thank you.
No wonder